The story begins in the central palace of the kingdom, in the spacious hall of the palace, where the young king Murmalik II held the document of surrender of the Duchy of Shidat in his hand. He glanced at the stern faces of the knights, who had not yet managed to hide their pride in their victory. The king noted that even his father could not have achieved such a feat. Now the kingdom's borders extended beyond the rich Halrik mine. For him, this was not just an achievement, but the fulfillment of a long-held dream. His calm, almost melodious praise sounded as if, with this sigh, a long, exhausting war had come to an end. The king noted with a sneer that he enjoyed thinking about what reward to give them. His words sounded less like praise and more like mockery. The king asked with a smile whether the heir to the Chladni family had not reached marriageable age during the war. The Margrave was surprised by this question. The king continued to talk about how the royal family must take responsibility. And again, he asked how old he was. The Margrave replied with difficulty that Eric was 24 years old. The young man's age was perfect for the king's plan. And then the decision was announced. The king intended to marry his younger sister to Eric. He spoke of her with ostentatious tenderness, emphasizing that he cherished her above all else. The Margrave froze in confusion. The hidden princess, whom no one had seen and who was already considered dead, suddenly became a prize. The Margrave is shocked by what is happening. The king gives the order to bring his beloved sister, Princess Misa Eskilir. When Misa finally appeared, all eyes turned to her. But no one was prepared for what they saw. With timid and awkward steps, the girl entered the hall. She wore a simple white dress, devoid of royal grandeur and adornments. Misa did not look like a princess at all. Eric was struck by her exhausted appearance. He did not expect to see the princess like this. Her eyes were empty, as if life itself had died in them. The king introduced the princess as a shy girl and called her over to him. Only timid sounds escaped the princess's lips. She looked as if she did not understand where she was. Her weakened legs gave way, and she fell to the floor with a crash. The king said that the princess was feeling a little unwell and asked for understanding. There was a hint of mockery in his eyes. Then the king said to Misa, in a feigned gentle tone, to stand up. The Margrave hastened to greet the princess, assuring her of his loyalty. Eric also hastened to greet his future wife. He bowed before the king and said that he would do everything in his power not to disgrace her or the king. To which the king replied that he should take a good look at the woman who was to become his wife. Summoning his strength, he walked toward the princess. Approaching her, he knelt on one knee before Misa, who was still sitting on the cold floor. Then he gently took her hand and said that it was an honor for him to serve her. However, Misa fearfully pulled her hand away. Eric was surprised by this reaction. He saw indescribable fear in her eyes. The king casually told Misa not to behave like that in front of her future husband. The princess approached the king and knelt down beside him. The king told her to apologize, but instead the princess made an incoherent sound. So, in an instant, the reward for Chladni's unwavering loyalty was a princess whose behavior caused alarm and shame. The Margrave and his wife sat in the carriage, enveloped in silence. However, behind the silence lay a growing fury against the king. Despite the victory in the war, where the Chladni undoubtedly became heroes. But the king did not like this. So, he came up with this marriage to retain power and weaken the influence of the Chladni. As a reward for the unwavering loyalty of the Chladni family, all they got was a sick princess. The Margrave was furious, but they had no choice but to obey the king's order. It was humiliating for the vassals and knights, but Eric accepted the inevitability of the marriage as his duty as heir. His cousin Amberic, shocked by what had happened, asked what would now become of the engagement to the Crispin family. The Margrave sharply rebuked him, asking how he dared to ask such questions. The engagement would, of course, be annulled. At that moment, overcome with anger, he exclaimed, "Are you not angry at all?" It was his wife, Taliesa. Margravine Taliesa coldly clarified what had just been said. The maids hastened to explain that the princess should not sleep alone, and Talia added that her bedroom was connected to the neighboring one by a passageway. The maids insisted, reminding her that the princess was unwell and should not be left alone. They added that if something happened to her during the night, it would be a disaster and would enrage the emperor. Talia coldly replied that this issue could be resolved by assigning servants to watch over her. The maids flared up with indignation, declaring that entrusting the princess to ordinary servants was unthinkable and that the emperor would be furious. The Margravine fell silent for a moment, her gaze becoming heavy and probing. She spoke slowly, as if clarifying for herself. "So, they want to say?" A tense silence hung in the room. It became clear where this was leading. The maids demanded that Eric himself look after the princess, placing this burden on the heir to Chladni. That night was filled with bitterness and resentment, but Eric remained calm. And finally, the day arrived. The wedding between the brave knight who had returned victorious from war and the princess was announced. This news brought smiles to the faces of the war-weary people. They were excited, because for those who did not know the truth, everything that was happening seemed like a real fairy tale. The city was filled with lively whispers and anticipation. The crowd eagerly awaited the princess's appearance, wondering what she would look like now that she had grown up. One of the girls dared to remark that, according to rumors, there was a lot of talk about the princess, but she did not have time to finish her sentence. Someone nearby hurriedly said that the Margrave was coming, hinting that she should be quiet. The Margrave and Margravine entered the hall, and the attention of everyone present immediately turned to them. The Margrave was whispered the news that the king would not be able to attend the wedding, and his face instantly darkened. The Margrave's fingers clenched into a fist, betraying the rage he was struggling to contain. The thought that the king was mocking him to the end was very annoying. He clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction, but restrained himself. The guests were asked to take their seats to participate in the ceremony. The priest addressed the groom, asking him to come forward and take his place on the pedestal. The groom appeared before everyone. His appearance combined strength and rare beauty. All eyes turned to the tall doors. The doors swung open and the princess entered the hall. The crowd gasped. She looked ill, her gait was unsteady, as if she could barely stand on her feet. The priest raised his voice, announcing the start of the sacred ceremony. Eric stood straight and confident, his gaze focused and calm. The princess looked up, her eyes revealing confusion and fragility. The statue above the altar served as a reminder of the solemnity of the occasion. The moment came when the bride and groom had to seal their union with a kiss. Their lips touched in a kiss that sealed their marriage before God and man. Eric closed his eyes as if trying to hide his tension and thoughts. The temple was plunged into reverent silence, and the moment seemed to last forever. The maids reminded Eric that he must not harm the princess on their wedding night. They added the confirmation of the marriage would be required in the morning. Eric nodded silently, accepting the conditions. Eric opened the doors to the bedroom, preparing to meet the princess alone. Upon entering the room, he was met with a striking sight: the princess tied to the bed. Eric stopped at the threshold, shocked by her condition. He slowly walked forward, approaching the bed. The princess's eyes were empty, almost lifeless. Eric began to slowly remove his clothes, preparing for their wedding night. He quietly and gently said "princess" and continued to undress. But at that moment, Eric noticed something that made him freeze. The princess was not just weak. She had been pumped full of sedatives in doses strong enough to put a horse to sleep. The thought that she had been treated worse than an enemy prisoner filled him with revulsion. He understood clearly that without the king's orders, this would not have been possible. Eric leaned over her and, feeling the coldness of her skin, said he would untie her. He asked if she was all right, massaging her legs to warm them up. Eric knew she couldn't be all right. Her condition was too serious. Eric thought that she must be in pain because her wrists were still tied. Eric freed her wrists. The ropes had been tied for so long that they had left marks on her skin. Her fingers had turned dark red. It would be a problem to leave things as they were. Eric knew there was no other way. He approached her and said, "Princess." He said he would lie down under the blanket for a while and asked her not to be afraid. Eric gently pulled her close under the blanket to warm her up. He said his name was Eric, that he was the son of the Chladni family, and that he was 24 years old. He told her that he had no brothers, and that his younger sister had died in an accident when he was a child. Eric said that because of the war, he had been living on the border, far from his family and home. He mentioned that today was their wedding day, and that he was now her husband. But how much she had managed to understand from what she had heard. However, Eric decided to explain the situation to her and continue talking. He explained why he was touching her hand. Winters are harsh abroad, and frostbite always starts at the fingertips. Eric added that it was very important to maintain normal blood circulation, and continued to gently rub her hands. He watched her face closely, hoping to see even the slightest signs of improvement. Gradually, her cheeks began to turn pink, her breathing became more even, and Eric breathed a sigh of relief. Convinced that she was warm, he thought that she would feel better after sleeping. Eric thought that he now needed to create proof of the wedding night. Eric wondered how he could draw his own blood to create proof of the wedding night without harming her. His gaze fell on the glasses standing nearby, and an idea flashed through his mind about how they could be used. In the morning, Eric held a blood-stained sheet in his hands as proof of the wedding night. The maids looked closely at the sheet, and one of them gasped in surprise, promising to take it to the priest. One of the maids said it was time to change the princess's clothes. Eric stopped them. He said that the princess had not yet woken up and asked them to wait. The maids reluctantly agreed. Eric stood at the door lost in thought. He exhaled heavily, trying to cope with the tension. He was surprised to hear strange sounds behind him. Eric turned around and saw the princess chewing on her outer garment with childlike innocence. She continued to pull the fabric into her mouth as if it were food. Eric told her it was inedible. Eric noticed that she must be hungry and asked her to be patient for a little while. He gently called out to her, addressing her as princess. Eric showed her the food, checking to see if it would interest her. The princess looked up uncertainly and reached for the food. She cautiously took a piece and hesitantly brought it to her mouth. Something resembling surprise flashed across Eric's face. She took a bite and cautiously tasted it. Eric watched her, his gaze softening. The princess ate slowly, as if every bite were new to her. He was glad she liked it. The setting sun painted the sky, and the majestic castle towered in the distance. That was where Eric was to take the princess. Eric returned home with the princess. His parents greeted them at the entrance silently and sternly. Eric quietly introduced the princess as his wife. Eric's father said that his son was tired and should rest first. The princess suddenly reached for the stone statue at the entrance, trying to climb on it. Eric immediately picked her up, preventing her from falling. The Margrave watched the scene with irritation, his face contorted with anger. Eric held the princess tightly in his arms. She looked confused and defenseless. The servants gathered nearby, watching them and whispering. Eric said he would take care of the princess himself, telling the servants to rest and unpack the luggage. The maids exchanged sly glances, not hiding their mockery. Eric addressed the butler, who responded respectfully. Eric said that from that day on, the princess was a member of their family and asked them to take good care of her, as she was not in good health. The butler replied that everything would be done and asked him not to worry. Eric carried the princess into the house, while his mother, Talisa, watched them silently. Talisa stood with her arms crossed, her gaze stern and cold. The table was set for dinner in the hall. The Hladny family sat silently at the table, the atmosphere tense. Eric told the maids that he would take care of her himself during dinner and that they could rest. The maids replied that everything was fine, as incidents often occurred with the princess during meals. Eric frowned, noticing a hostile gleam in the maid's eyes, even though her words sounded polite. Eric asked if there was any food that the princess preferred or disliked. The servant replied that she could eat anything. Eric turned to the princess and gently suggested that she try one of the dishes. The princess obediently opened her mouth, but her gaze remained vacant. Eric watched her reaction closely, his eyes betraying his anxiety. The princess pretended to eat, but her movements were uncertain and tense. Suddenly, she spat out her food, splattering it across the table. Eric was stunned by her reaction. The princess screamed, and Eric, holding her back, quietly asked her to calm down. He tried to ask if she didn't like the food, but she responded with another hysterical scream. Eric concluded that the princess needed to rest and compose herself. The maids bowed, confirming that they understood his instructions. Eric stood up with the princess, preparing to lead her away from the table. Eric's parents watched the scene unfold with cold expressions on their faces. Eric's father sighed heavily, clearly suppressing his irritation. Eric's father, so that no one could overhear them, turned to his wife in sign language, asking if it was worth keeping the princess alive at all. Talia responded to him in sign language as well. If they killed the princess, they would die too. Eric just raised his eyebrows quietly. The kingdom of Esquilier had long been ruled by three great families. They were called the pillars of the state. The Salakez family was responsible for internal order and stability. The Crispin family protected the capital's security. The Hladny family defended the country's external borders and army. All three families had enormous influence over the army and the state's defense. The previous king's wives were from these families, which strengthened the union. But the current ruler, Mermalik II, rejected tradition. Under the pretext of restoring royal power, the Salakez family was destroyed by Mermalik II himself. Not satisfied with this, he began to oppress the two remaining families, who could no longer tolerate his pressure. The families concluded a secret agreement on the succession to the throne and decided to raise an uprising immediately after the end of the war. But the plan did not go as expected. The Hladny family won major victories and won the sympathy of the people, who were tired of tyranny. The king could no longer ignore this. The Margrave clenched his fist, struggling to contain his rage at what was happening. Taliesa remained coldly calm, while the butler waited attentively for her orders. Taliesin reminded him that not long ago, the princess had been fine, and her current condition was a result of the turmoil in the kingdom. The Margrave added irritably that the vassals were already proposing to replace Eric with Amberic. He emphasized that the heir to the family could always be changed, making it clear that Eric's position was precarious. The Margrave called the princess insane, which made Eric's position even more fragile. Eric remained silent, not objecting, and his silence only increased the tension at the table. The conversation turned to Grand Duke Hagael, whose decision everyone was waiting for, but the Margrave was annoyed by his slowness. His words were tinged with mockery, questioning Hagel's intelligence and determination. It was noted that Hagel was the king's cousin and the only living member of the dynasty besides the princess, so without his consent, the coup would not be recognized as legitimate. He had been crippled in a supposed accident. Now he could not have children. His life was nearing its end. The Margrave lost his temper, exclaiming that nothing was going according to plan. In a rage, he cursed. Talia coldly remarked that he could not even control himself. The Margravine asked Eric what he thought about uniting the two families through marriage. Eric calmly remarked that it was impossible from the start. With the king still alive, the wedding would only attract attention. He added that without a clear heir to the throne, it would take many years to convince the nobility. The Margravine agreed with his reasoning. She emphasized that the years spent on the battlefield had dulled his political instincts. The Margravine said that in a situation that even a young man like Eric could understand, the Margrave was proposing to kill this child. She added that they needed to assess the whole situation first. She coldly remarked that Eric always remains himself, until even the maids criticize him. Talia called the princess this child. She asked her son to try not to get attached to her. Eric listened silently, hiding his confusion behind an outward calm. The Margravine coldly remarks that male affection is superficial. If kindness comes at a price, it is better not to show it. She sums up her thoughts and tells him not to torment the poor child. Night falls over the mansion, and the words spoken at the table dissolve into silence. Lonely footsteps echo in the deserted corridor. Eric wondered anxiously if even his mother wanted to get rid of the princess. He recalled the previous night with the princess. Strange feelings enveloped him. He felt very sorry for her, and he did not want a bad fate for her. On his way to his bedroom, Eric heard a noise coming from the bedroom. These were the voices of the maids who were treating the princess harshly. Eric stopped. The maids were shouting and scolding the girl. They said that she was too restless and strong today, apparently because she had eaten too much. The maids brazenly discussed the Margrave and his family. But at that moment, Eric's voice suddenly rang out. He had heard only a little, but it was enough to stop the circus. He said that he would take care of the princess himself from now on. Eric could only guess how she had been treated before. He praised them and let them go. Their eyes showed open hostility. They hurriedly left the room, saying they would come in the morning to wake the princess. Silence hung in the room. Miesa sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair. Eric said that his wife was in a good mood today. He approached her and sat down next to her. He explained that it was a country estate and that from now on, she would be traveling back and forth between this estate and the Hladny territory. He said he hoped she would like it. He asked her about her discomfort, but paused, thinking about their meeting with their eyes. But she quickly lost interest. Something else bothered him. Didn't she have any other clothes? Why on earth is the princess dressed like that? He was confused. Her clothes resembled prison garb. Misa raised her head and her gaze met Eric's. The princess's face was very beautiful and sweet. Eric was struck by her beauty. His heart began to beat faster. They moved closer to each other, wanting to passionately merge their lips in a hot kiss. But wait! The princess began to play with her lips childishly and spit. It seemed that only Eric wanted to kiss her. Returning to reality, Eric gently told his wife that she shouldn't spit in people's faces. He told her to go to bed and rest, and that he would finish his work and go to bed too. He felt uncomfortable about his thoughts. He left, telling her to call him if she needed anything. Misa whispered something quietly after him. Moonlight filled the room with its light. Eric and Misa were already asleep. Suddenly, there was a loud clap of thunder and a flash of lightning. The next morning, Eric and Misa were sitting at breakfast. He asked Misa how she slept. Misa remained silent, as if she did not understand him. Eric said that she was probably uncomfortable because the bed was different from her previous one. Although the princess responded with incomprehensible sounds, he could see that she was sad. Eric understood her without words. Her complexion was worse than usual, although she had looked normal before going to bed. Eric asked her to eat something, even if she had no appetite. but the princess decided to dip her hands in the soup. She squeezed the pieces of meat tightly and squeezed them, and then she put them in her mouth. Eric was shocked by his wife's behavior. Despite what was happening, he remained calm and patient. After the princess's arrival at the mansion, several days passed at a frantic pace. After Eric's wedding, the atmosphere in the estate changed. Here is our handsome Eric. Everyone greeted their captain, but it seemed that everyone wanted to say something, and the atmosphere was tense. Noticing this, Eric asked them if their training for the day was over. If not, why were they standing there? In the evenings, things were not going well at the estate either. For some reason, Margrave Hladny began to avoid family dinners. Lady Hladny expressed her dissatisfaction, saying that he couldn't control his emotions. And the vassals of the Hladny estate were completely at a loss. But no one dared to say anything openly to Eric. He always appeared calm and unshakable, as if nothing had happened. After finishing his training, Eric asked where his wife was. The butler replied that she was in her study. The answer did not surprise him in the least. Eric opened the door slightly. The maids were sitting on the floor, cheerfully discussing something. They were talking about the princess, who apparently liked it here very much since she was sleeping so soundly. They were worried about whether it was okay for the princess to sleep on their clothes. After all, the maids wore them. The maids were delighted with the color of the princess's hair. Even gold was not as beautiful as her hair. They were touched by her. At that moment, Eric entered the room. Upon entering, he inquired about the two maids. It turned out that they had left again. Therefore, these lovely maids were looking after the princess. Eric praised them for their work and proceeded to Misa. The maids began to justify themselves, saying that they had put their clothes under the princess because the floor was too cold and hard. Eric replied that they could return to work. After all, he would now take care of his wife himself. Eric walked up the stairs carrying his wife in his arms. He carried her so easily, as if she were as light as a feather. And when they entered the bedroom, Eric was just about to lay her on the bed, when suddenly the princess woke up. She didn't like not having solid ground under her feet. She began to cry and struggle in discontent. Eric asked her to wait a little longer. After all, he had almost carried her to the bed. He had just laid her on the bed. Miesa immediately assumed a defensive posture, like a wild cat. Eric clearly did not expect this. He watched her for several days and realized that Miesa did not particularly like him. And for some reason, she considers Eric a means of transportation. In any case, she touched his heart. Looking closely, Eric noticed a thread in her hair. He approached to remove it. Suddenly, Misa abruptly dodged his hand. Her reaction was reflexive. What had she been through to react like that? Eric put his hand on her head and said gently that he didn't want to scare her. He would just quickly remove the debris from her head. He looked at her, thinking how cute she was. Misa looked frightened. Their eyes met again, and he remembered the maid's words. One maid said she had met a cat that looked like the princess. This made Eric smile. At night, at the Hladny estate, Misa slept sweetly in her bed. Eric sits at the table and works hard. He holds a letter and studies it carefully. The names Malik and Dayal were written there. These are the names of the two maids from the king who mistreated Misa. These maids leave the princess every time and disappear at every opportunity. They are definitely plotting something. In addition, Erica was concerned about the food supply for the inhabitants of the territory. There was too much to sort out. He is holding a letter in his hands. After opening and reading it, he realizes that he now has one more problem to deal with. It was a report on his orders. As a result of surveillance on the man on his orders, it was confirmed that they had another meeting in that house on the outskirts. Chief Hladny was with the girl from the tavern. One day, Eric's father suddenly began discussing marriage with the Crispin family. At that time, only Eric had suspicions. Looking back, he realizes he was right. For knights and vassals, his father's proposal was not a bad idea, but Eric couldn't shake his feeling of unease. So from that day on, he began to watch him carefully. And then he witnessed something unacceptable. He discovered that his father was having an affair with a girl from the tavern. This was the first time Eric had encountered his father's misconduct. It left a bitter taste in his mouth. But between life and death on the battlefield, he couldn't bring himself to bring it up. Eric tried to find out if this woman had any hidden motives or patrons, but he couldn't find anything significant. So, he decided to keep this secret to himself. But after the war ended, his father brought this girl here. He even ordered his right-hand man, Sir Kelbanig, to take her as his second wife. That's how devoted he is to her. Eric had no choice but to carefully inform his mother of this, passing on the evidence in a letter. But the Margravine did not want to hear about it. She said she was already old, so it did not matter if he slept with another woman. In the letter, The maid conveyed all the Margravine's words. Eric was surprised by this reaction, but he couldn't stop thinking about his father's mistress. His mother wrote in her letter that if she were an aristocrat, it would be easier to find out about her past. But apart from her fake husband and the head of the Cold family, there was no one else in the house. Throwing down the letter, Eric sighed wearily. Once again, he had learned nothing new. To tell the truth, Eric's mother's reaction was quite natural to him. After all, in the world of the aristocracy, marriage was often seen not as a union of hearts, but as a union of houses. Suddenly, something caught Eric's attention. It was our princess, Misa. She woke up and headed toward Eric. Approaching his table, she ran to Eric and sat on his lap. Eric was shocked by his wife's actions. His heart beat faster. Suddenly, the sheets of paper caught Misa's attention. Eric, seeing her curiosity, warned her that it might not be as exciting as she thought. Misa took the sheet in her hands and began to study it. But less than a minute later, she grew tired of him and tore a piece off him. Eric was glad that the princess was no longer avoiding him. She had approached him herself for the first time, and he did not feel guilty. Due to unexpected events and his dissatisfaction with the king, he had not yet considered that he would spend the rest of his life with this girl, experiencing new emotions. He remembered how, as a child, he had dreamed of knighthood, honor, and responsibility. But over time, he realized that behind all this lay a duty to his family, a blood covenant for the sake of future generations. He never expected much from his wife and did not hope for happiness. Even if she tore up papers or behaved strangely, it didn't matter. Eric no longer had high hopes for his relationship with women, but now when she reached for his documents, he gently stopped her, asking her not to tear them up. She insisted, as if she wanted to get his attention, and Eric allowed himself a gentle rebuke for the first time with a slight smile. Harassment won't help. I'm not done reading yet. The next morning, Margravine Taliesa and her maid were sitting in the room. She told her mistress that it was almost March, and that perhaps they should prepare a large brazier in the greenhouse for the upcoming concert. Taliesa agreed with her idea. She said to start preparations early, as this year was colder than usual. At that moment, Princess Miesa and her maid entered the room. The Margravine did not expect such an encounter. Suddenly, Miesa falls to the floor in front of the Margravine. Everyone stares at the princess in surprise. The Margravine says that her behavior is quite unusual. She says that the princess usually stays with her maids. But today she came to me. Taliesa's maid noticed that she calls her princess as if she were a stranger. Taliesa agreed, but she still doesn't know how to address her. The Margravine turned to Madame Diala to find out how to address the princess correctly. After all, she is a lady-in-waiting. In response, she received only silence. But the Margravine thought that she was useless and did not even try to get along with others. Talisa's maid said she had looked into the matter. 3 generations ago, there was a similar situation. The head of the family and his wife addressed the princess by name. And since the young master had introduced her as his wife, the Margravine could try calling her by her name. And for the first time, that name was heard in the hall, Miesa. Miesa looked at the Margravine at that very moment. She sat up abruptly and smiled, showing that she liked her. The Margravine smiled back. The maid and Taliesa talked about how beautiful the princess's name was. Madame Diala began to flatter the Margravine, saying that the princess liked her and asked her to look after her until dinner. Taliesa agreed, letting her go to rest. She took her leave and departed. After she left, the maid sighed. She said that the royal servants were very picky and that one had to be careful around them. She continues to say that Madame Diala idles all day but still bathes the princess regularly, and Madame Malika has never been seen in the vicinity of the estate. She was curious about the reason for their blatant laziness. Miesa lay on the floor looking at the pattern on the carpet. The Margravine had a headache. She asked her maid Adele to bring her some medicine for her headache. Adele asked the maid if it was the usual medicine. The maid replied in the affirmative and added that it was lying by the bed. Adele praised her and went to her mistress. Mrs. Taliesa was sitting on the sofa, and Misa was sitting on the floor next to her. Adele left the medicine and walked away. She was surprised by her mistress's unusual behavior. It was the first time she had allowed someone to lie on her lap. Adele asked Mrs. Taliesa if she was all right and whether she should call a doctor. Taliesa begins to take an interest in this child, asking her age. Misa is 20 years old. Adele recounts that at a young age, Misa witnessed the deaths of half of the royal family. Taliesa suggested that it must have been so painful that she went mad, and even now people take advantage of her left and right. Taliesa said she felt very sorry for her. The maid was shocked. The lady suddenly said that this child was so beautiful. Her gaze lingered involuntarily on Miesa. there was something familiar about her. She said that her facial features and eye color were very beautiful. Mrs. Taliesa asked her to make sure that Miisa ate well. The maid was curious when her mistress came so close that she could see the color of her eyes. Taliesa said that her hair was a mess, which made it difficult to see her face. Come to think of it, the color of her eyes seemed familiar. Could it be that the lady saw her own child in her? Misa's hair was tangled and she wanted to sleep. The lady offered to comb her hair. Miisa responded indistinctly. Meanwhile, at the other end of the mansion, Eric was wondering what his wife was doing. The butler said that she had been with Mrs. Taliesa since morning. Eric headed to the hall to see his wife. As he approached the door, he heard a noise coming from the room with Miisa. Lady Taliesa was cutting Misa's nails. Adele asked to do it herself, but the lady refused, wanting to finish the job herself. She was also afraid of frightening Miisa with sudden touches. When Eric entered the room, he saw a rather strange scene. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. He asked what was going on. Mrs. Taliesa said that she had cut Misa's nails because they seemed to be uncomfortable during walks. Eric was surprised that his own mother, who had never done anything like this for him, was doing it for his wife. It was unusual for his mother to care for someone like this. She might feel sympathy sometimes, but not enough to cut someone's nails. She was always cold, even to her own son. But now she's looking at the princess with a tenderness that's hard to believe. She had that expression on her face for only one person, for Eric's younger sister, Rosie. Could it be that his mother is projecting her memories of Rosie onto Miisa? Eric came closer and said he would cut Misa's nails himself. His mother refused, saying she would finish it herself. Eric took the scissors and said he would finish it himself. The reason for Eric's growing concern was his mother's behavior on the day of Rosie's death. Did he have the right to interfere? He took her foot and began to cut Misa's nails. Miisa lay quietly, surrounded by people praising her for her behavior. She whispered something. Adele turned around, sensing something was wrong. Misa's expression was very sweet and angry at the same time. She felt something strange. She was uncomfortable. Adele thought she didn't look very well. An idea had already formed in her head. She put the cookie in the unhappy princess's mouth, surprising everyone around her with her decision. Eric asked her what she had just done. Adele replied that she thought the princess was uncomfortable. She used to calm down when she gave her sweets. Apparently, the princess really likes sweets. Eric understood and continued cutting her nails. Eric's mother looked at Miisa and commented on how neatly she was eating, how she was taking small bites. She said she was glad to see that the princess was eating well. At dinner that evening, Eric took care of his wife by feeding her with a spoon. He taught her not to swallow everything at once. He wondered what his mother had seen that reminded her of Rosie. Was it the color of her eyes, which was similar to Rosie's? But if it was the color of her eyes, then there was also his cousin Amberic. However, his mother had never treated him in a special way. The butler entered, carrying a roasted quail. He apologized for the delay in serving. Eric told him to leave it and go away. Eric thought about how the princess behaved calmly when they were alone. This dish was not too difficult to eat. Suddenly, Miisa felt ill. She held her head, trying to ease the pain. She made sounds like moans of pain. Eric didn't understand what was wrong. He began to ask her what was wrong. Miisa pointed to the plate with the quail. Eric didn't understand the reason, but he knew one thing. She felt sick because of the fried quail. He said he would remove it from the table immediately. He took the dish away and ordered it to be cleared. Eric was angry with the maids because they had said that the princess had no food she disliked. What had happened to her in the past that made her feel sick at the sight of fried poultry? Perhaps she had had a negative experience with quail at the palace? In the morning of the new day, the maids asked the young lady not to lie on the cold floor. But Miisa lay there as if she did not understand their words. She did not want to change her position. Then the maids decided to put a blanket under her. Despite being busy, the maids found time to care for the princess. Young maids whispered among themselves. They did not understand her strange behavior, but they felt sorry for her nonetheless. No one was sure how much the young lady understood. Some even whispered that it was strange. After all, Eric had never shown any interest in women before, and now he cared so much about one. But they were quickly silenced, reminded that unnecessary words could cost them their heads. The conversation imperceptibly turned to her clothes. The girls complained that the dresses got dirty quickly, and suddenly one of them suggested making a bib decorated with embroidery for the princess. Others were enthusiastic about the idea, adding floral patterns, embroidering delicate designs especially for her. These simple conversations revealed their unexpected affection for her. They began to see her not as a burden, but as a little lady. Everyone except these 3 maids. Meanwhile, Eric was training outside. He looks at the sun and realizes that lunchtime is long gone. Eric was worried about his wife, wondering if she had eaten well today. Eric headed inside the mansion, worrying along the way that she might not have eaten or been able to play well with the maids. He was also unsure if he could entertain her as well as the maids did. When he met the butler, Eric learned that Misa had fallen into the stream that afternoon, changed her clothes, eaten, and taken a nap. She was now in the maid's workroom. Apparently, the princess saw fish in the stream on her way to the chapel with the lady and accidentally fell in. Since she was with his mother, it couldn't have been very dangerous. He was glad that her day had been eventful. She had been quite busy all day. Eric was leaving when the butler suddenly stopped him. He said that the young lady did not like the chapel very much. Eric was not surprised. After all, Misa gets bored sitting in one place for a long time. At first, she calmly followed the lady. But as soon as they arrived, she began to fidget at the entrance, so she stayed outside until the end of the service. Eric thought that if she had sweets, she would like it there. His heart skipped a beat. Eric made a decision. From now on, there would always be an endless supply of sweets on the tables. The butler understood the order and bowed. At dinner, Eric fed Miesa with a spoon. He said she had a good appetite today. The princess looked energetic at dinner. Eric watched her eat with relief and moved the plates closer to her. He gently encouraged her to try not only meat, but also vegetables. He fed her himself, holding out a piece of food. Just as Misa was about to eat the pieces, one of them suddenly fell. Eric reassured her, saying that everything was fine and that he would give her a new one. Eric apologized and removed the piece from her clothes. Seeing the piece of food in front of her, she began to reach for it to eat. Eric pushed her away, promising to cut off a new piece and explaining that this one was no longer edible. But Misa did not understand what was wrong with the piece that had fallen. She grabbed his hand and ate the piece right off his fingers. Eric was aroused by the surprise. It was the first time he had ever felt such sensations, so he pulled his hand away in surprise. Misa was surprised by his behavior. She clearly did not like this attitude towards her. She grabbed the tablecloth and pulled it, knocking all the food on the table. One of her maids came to the noise. She caught Misa ruining another meal. She took the princess away to bathe and change her clothes, thinking on the way how tiresome it was to spend every meal like this. Left alone, Eric sighed quietly. His fingers still remembered the warmth of her hands, her breath nearby. At night in bed, Eric couldn't sleep. His head was a complete mess. He caught himself feeling this closeness too keenly. Eric admitted to himself, Misa was his wife, but she was like a child, perhaps even incapable of realizing who he was to her. He told himself that he had no right to fall in love with her, convincing his heart of this, although it had long since begun to waver.